What's the worst date you ever had? Came out from a movie late at night and 8's Camaro was stolen. Apparently, he called his wife that I did not know he had and let her know where he was and what happened. She showed up and realized he was on a date. She started chasing me around the parking lot telling me she was going to kill me. Saved by the cops who showed up just in time to take the auto theft report. Never understood that. Why do people get mad at the person who isn't there so when they're so is the one stepping out on them? Seriously. Unless it's someone that already knows the people and is very in the know on the cheating. Leave that poor person alone. Girl I met online claimed to be 24. Turned out to be 16. Fortunately I figured it out before anything crazy happened, but man talk about dodging a bullet. This was my greatest fear back before I met my wife. I lived in a college town, but somehow teenagers would get in the dating pool. Well, I gave this answer on a different topic, but it ties in with this. We were out on a date. We had been seeing each other for a while, close to a year maybe. She gets a phone call. Suddenly she looks destroyed. Her fiance had just died in a motorcycle accident. I got catfished. We talked for hours, and when it came time to pick her up I clearly saw it wasn't the person I thought I was talking to. I just gunned it and sped off. I just don't get this one. I get catfishes that avoid meeting the person. That makes sense to me. Don't wanna blow your cover. But I don't get the catfish that is willing to meet. Like what's the best case scenario they're hoping for here? I was brought up in Poland by Polish parents, university professors. Went to a Polish school, Polish university etc. Then I had a date with an American man whose grandmother was Polish. He grilled me on the language and criticized my pronunciation and corrected my grammar. This from a guy whose Polish vocabulary was maybe 100 words. He told me I speak like a peasant. I don't even think that's how negging is supposed to work. Laughing my butt off. WTF was he doing? Fixed typo lol. It was a double date. She was more interested talking to the other girl throughout the whole thing. Found out later from the other guy that his girl cheated on him with my date. Wow, that was a twist ending I didn't see coming. Met a girl through a dating site and we agreed to meet up for dinner. I learned very quickly that this girl had absolutely no sense of humor whatsoever. I don't even think she cracked a smile the entire night. The date just got more and more painful as the night went on. At one point, we were talking about online dating. She told me about a friend of hers that went out on a first date with a guy online. She said this crazy guy fell absolutely in love with her friend and said he wanted to marry her. So I said, oh, well, I guess I shouldn't have picked up this engagement ring on the way here. Then, she just stared at me blankly and said that's not funny. Yes, it is. Duck you. I think it was funny too. I remember when I was dating my wife. She told me on several occasions guys would tell her I love you on the first date. They never got a second date. My response was I don't love you. Yet we have been married 31 years. Brilliant move. Always include a yet with things like this. Best to cover your ass haha. I smoked a lot of weed at the time and had a date with a girl I met on a Cupid who was 420 friendly. She told me to bring some with me. So we met at a Mexican restaurant at 7:30 and smoked in my car before going in. As soon as we finished the bowl, she was like, oh I forgot. I have work at 8 tonight. Bye. So she either went through all that effort to get smoked out one time, or she lemon lawed me but still wanted to bum a smoke session off me. Either way, I was high as duck and wasn't going to not get some enchiladas. So I went in and got a table for one. Love the confidence. Duck it. I'ma get some food anyways. On one date I showed up at her parents' house to pick her up, thinking we are going for drinks in the neighborhood. She opens up the door wearing sweatpants, trainers and a hoodie, as if she just got back from football practice. I was pretty well dressed, so she decided to change into something else. She says I can just wait in the living room with her parents. Not that bad. We had some small talk and I expect to be leaving soon anyways. She then shows up wearing the next less than casual outfit and sits down in the living room as well. Saying nothing, she just gets on her phone. She's doing nothing but texting whilst I'm left talking with her parents. Didn't expect a date with them. At this point I don't know what to expect anymore. Luckily I was able to convince her to go out after a bit, and we end up having drinks. All in all, she wasn't my type. Definitely after that date. Met a girl at a country bar one night in my 20s. We were both pretty drunk, but hit it off pretty good. Ended up getting her number and we agreed we'd go on a real date. Fast forward to the date. She gets in my vehicle and she looks almost identical to my mom. I was mortified. I was polite and we went for lunch, where I found out she also had a boyfriend she wasn't sure if she was into. Never talked to her again. That's crazy, because I also went on a date with someone that looked exactly like your mom. Got set up on a blind date once between mutual friends. She shows up to the restaurant already a little tipsy, orders multiple appetizers, and only takes like 1 or 2 bites from each one. Then she proceeds to order 3 or 4 more drinks, and is visibly drunk at this point. She gets up and says she's going to the bathroom and staggers off. About 15-20 minutes go by, so I try to call her several times but no answer. Finally I decide to pay the check and just leave. About 2 hours later I'm sitting at home, and I get a call from an unknown number. It's the police department. She was picked up on a DUI on her way home, after she ditched me and gave the cops my number to see if I could go bail her out. I've never had a legendarily bad date, but I've had a few very bad ones. Worst one was a dude I met on OKC. He'd seemed nice enough online, looked decent. We made plans to meet at a board games cafe, since he spoke pretty enthusiastically about loving board games and playing a lot of them, in no particular order. The problems were, he showed up 20 minutes late. He was significantly more overweight than he was in his photos. I assume they were old pictures. He was wearing a stained white shirt and cargo shorts, was visibly sweaty. It was February, and cold and smelled awful. He hadn't told me that he clearly had some sort of mobility disability. I didn't ask, but I assume cerebral palsy or something similar. He walked with 2 crutches. This wouldn't have been an issue, but I felt very weird about the fact that he didn't tell me ahead of time, because the first thing out of his mouth was how the cafe was in such a shitty place with no disabled parking, and he'd had to walk a significant distance. Dude, if I'd known, I'd suggested somewhere more accessible. He refused to order anything from the cafe, and instead drank only from the large bottle of water he'd brought in his bag. I had already covered his entry fee. Perhaps he really couldn't afford a 2-pint of Coke, but it came across as weird and rude. He didn't show any interest in any of the board games. My plan had been for him to pick a game he liked, and for me to pick a game I liked, and to play one after the other while we talked. After I clocked how difficult he found it to move around, I offered to go pick up whatever game his pick was. You could browse the shelves pretty effectively from a seated position. He had no ideas. Zero. Hadn't heard of any of the games. I finally brought over one of the games we'd talked about on OKC Oddings Ravens, and he acted like he'd never seen it before, giving me the distinct impression he'd lied about liking games, or at least that one. For an unknown reason, conversation was just generally very stilted. I kept bringing up topics. So, what do you do? Who do you live with? Are you a town native? What are your hobbies? What are you doing for the rest of this weekend? Have you ever played game? And getting just knew a thing. Single word or short sentence answers. He didn't ask me a single thing. I don't know if he was just nervous, or autistic, or just decided early on that he didn't like me, or what. But it was awkward as heck. I stayed the minimum I could to be polite, just over an hour. I sort of assumed he just wasn't having a good time, so I was utterly baffled when he then tried to hug me goodbye, not until you shower PLS, and tried to set up a second date. I gave him a vague response about staying in touch, then gave him the slow fade. I'm still baffled. Maybe fate was just conspiring against him that day and he wanted another shot. I have no idea. When I was in college many years ago, before the advancement of cell phones and social media, I was chatting with a girl I met on a BBS who lived on Long Island, New York. I was 18 at the time, but lied and said I was 22 because she said she was 25. We spent a few weeks emailing each other, as well as calling each other. We even exchanged pics. When we finally met up, things blew up. Turns out we both lied about our ages. She was really 33 and lied because she thought she looked younger. She admitted she sent a college photo to me. We still had dinner together, but it was awkward as heck. We never spoke again. Got set up on a blind date by some friends several years before my wife and I started dating. The date was early September, and we met in a restaurant in the city. It was a nice place, the kind where the waitstaff wear dress shirts, ties, etc. I was in a nice suit and tie. She showed up in jeans, flip-flops, and a hoodie. I jokingly said something along the lines of, "I'm assuming they didn't tell you this place is sort of snooty." She goes, "They did." I didn't give a duck. I ain't shaving my legs and putting on some fancy dress for some guy who I don't even know if I want to even touch his dick, let alone if I'm willing to let him between my legs. I just stared at her in disbelief. She then said, "I mean, you seem nice and all, but I ain't in the mood to do all that work when I can just go home and do it myself." I asked her to keep her voice down, and she goes, "Why do you want me to keep my voice down? You afraid people will hear me talking about going home and ducking myself with my vibrator instead of letting you come back and duck me?" I just stood up, walked over to the waiter, paid for the drink I had while waiting, apologized to them for her outbursts, and said, "Blind date, I'm not sticking around," and left. I did hear from our mutual friends that she later got married to some guy, stabbed him on their anniversary a few years later, and is now in jail for attempted murder. They were like, "Yeah, we always knew she was kinda crazy. Yeah, ducking think." Tinder date. She looked nothing like her picture. Well, not ugly, just completely different. Picked the worst restaurant in town, which I looked past because everyone has different taste. We came back to my house and complained about not showing affection or touching her, so I started touching her and then got mad about her wanting a hookup, which I didn't. But the final straw was when she decided she didn't like my house, which I had just bought and was proud of. She immediately wanted to go to Home Depot to buy stuff to start remodeling. It was by far my worst and weirdest date, and I hope she found a house to remodel. Showed up to a Tinder date where we agreed, but she wasn't there. Texted and she said they were around the corner. Come to find her mid-20s divorced socialite and her friend mid-40s salesman had been drinking all day and were proper shit-faced. Proceeded to join them at the table, where she proceeded to talk about the married guy at the next table and kept walking by and dropping things so she could bend over in front of him. Then some racist talk and some cocaine, use them, not me. And then they decided, mercifully, to ditch me because I was no fun. For me, it was a date that never ended up happening, lol. I had met a guy on a dating app eons ago. First date was a good one. We went to a hockey game and it was a really fun time. Then later in the week he wanted to see a movie. I was down. We quickly decided on a movie and what time we'd meet up. I arrived a little early and decided to just shop around casually as the theater was in a mall. I also bought some snacks to sneak inside because I'm not paying a small fortune for theater snacks, lol. As the startup time was creeping closer, I shot some texts to him to see whereabouts he was because he was not there yet. He was 5 minutes late, so I wasn't too concerned just yet. He texted me back saying that he only just woke up and was now busy jacking off, that he'd be there as soon as he was done. I reminded him what time it was. I was a little irritated because 1, I had to drive an hour from outside the city to get there, and he knew this, and 2, this was completely different behavior compared to the first date, which had been really pleasant. The movie was set to start in 5 minutes. I had yet to get tickets because he said he would buy them. I'm not sure what he was thinking, but when I told him that we were going to miss the showtime, he told me that if he was buying movie tickets for us, that he expected at least a BJ afterwards or during the movie. I told him to drop dead and that I was leaving. I went out to my car. Meanwhile, he is texting me non-stop about how he didn't mean it, that he just had a dirty sense of humor, and that he was on his way. He'd be there in less than 2 minutes. I told him I didn't think it was funny. I thought it was incredibly rude and inappropriate, and that I had zero desire to ever see him again. Maybe I was overreacting, but I felt justified in my anger. Went to brewery. Date said I had hairy arms and that meant I was horny. Said you look really awful in this light, and then tried to dig out of that hole by saying in his native language that was a term of endearment long-term couples said to each other. 10 did not date again. Went out with a girl when we were probably 13 or 14. We went to see Inception. She gets up to go to the bathroom, but doesn't come back for a long time. Eventually I go look for her, and the guy behind the concession stand looks at me and gives me the most pitying look I've ever received, and points around the corner, where I found her making out with another guy. I should have walked out, but instead I went back to my seat to watch the rest of the movie. She returned and asked me to fill her in on the last hour of Inception of all the damn movies to miss the middle of. Also, because that wasn't enough, after the movie, I wasn't sure what bus to take home, and she pointed me to the wrong bus. I don't think this was intentional. They were right next to each other, and I wound up in a part of the city I'd never been in before.